Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I will call this Public Safety and Homeland Security meeting to order today. I'm going to ask our friend Mike Jackson if he would lead us in an invocation before we get started, please.
Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, as we come before you, we give you thanks for this day, Lord, for truly this is the day that you have made. And Father, we just ask for you to comfort the families who are going through this pandemic, who have lost loved ones, Lord. Comfort them in a special way. And then, Father, we ask you to give us guidance, give us wisdom as we go through these meetings and these hearings, Lord. Give solutions, Father. Let us have the mind that you would have us to have in everything we do. In Jesus' name, amen.
We have some of our own that are suffering from COVID. I spoke with Representative Becky Evans yesterday, and she has tested positive for COVID and couldn't be here with us today. And she's actually sent us an email, and I'm going to send that around to members of the committee just as a precautionary, kind of for your information, her experience with COVID and testing positive and feeling like she had some symptoms, and she wound up testing positive after a few times. And so I want to share that with members of the committee just to be able to go back and share with people in your community. So we certainly want to ask that you remember Representative Evans. We're here today to continue the discussion that this committee has been charged with, is dealing with the crime in Atlanta. I think every weekend throughout the week, we can see the local headlines discussing the amount of crime and the things that we're seeing in Atlanta. And this committee has been charged with trying to come up with a solution to some of the problems that have occurred here in our capital city. So today we're going to hear some more testimony, hear some things from different individuals. The colonel has been gracious enough to come back and be able to give us an update on some of the things that the governor's office and the Department of Public Safety have been working on to try to mitigate some of the issues that we're seeing in the Atlanta area. Last time we met, it was a very lengthy meeting, and there were a few people that wanted to speak that were not able to do so. And we want to apologize to them. We have one of those groups up first. Moms Demand Action is online through Zoom, as well as numerous members of this committee today that could not make it in person. Do we have a list of who all is online here today? Abby? Okay. We have Representative Gloria Frazier is with us on Zoom. Representative Rick Jaspers is on Zoom. Representative David Jenkins, Representative Petrie, Representative Powell, and Representative Taylor are all on Zoom here. And we'll try to recognize anyone else who jumps online in the next few moments. And there may be some that come and go. So we'll try to keep you abreast of that. But now we're going to turn to the moms who demand action to speak with us today. Are you with us?
Hi, I'm here. I'm on Zoom.
Okay, hold on just a second. We can see you, but we can't hear you. Are you muted?
I'm not muted. Can you hear me now?
Bear with us here. Can you try that again? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me now? Can you hear that?
Stand by with us just a second. We'll get back to you here in just a moment. I understand the Zoom members can hear you, but we cannot hear you. would you be okay if we came back to you once we got this working? Can you give me a thumbs up?
Sure.
If that's okay with you? That's okay with you? Okay. All right. We're going to improvise and move on. We have here in person to speak with us today is Pete Skandalakis from the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. Pete, our friend, if you'd like to come up and speak with us, you can sit wherever you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be in front of this committee and to be able to address y'all. I'll try to keep my comments short and answer any questions you can. Just by way of introduction, my name is Peter John Skandalakis. I'm the Executive Director of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia. Prior to serving as the Executive Director of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia, I was an Assistant DA in the Coweta Judicial Circuit, which included the chairman's city, Villa Rica there, and he was mayor of. I was an Assistant DA in the Coweta Judicial Circuit for 7 years. In 1991, I was appointed as the District Attorney and served in that capacity for 25 years. I was in the middle of, I had just begun my 7th term when this position came open with the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, and I wanted to do something for the state of Georgia. And so I took this position. And I can tell you this, one thing I know, my 37 years of experience in prosecution has taught me this. I don't have all the answers. I'll never have all the answers, but I'm here to answer any questions you have and to be able to offer my assistance and the assistance of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council in coming up with a solution to not only the increase in crime in Atlanta, but across the state in general. My agency is a small agency. It's not a large agency. We have 46 employees. Our mission is to act as the fiscal agent for all state prosecutors, DA's offices. We also serve the 50 district attorneys, the 27 full-time solicitor generals, 39 part-time solicitor generals, and all the prosecutors employed by those elected officials. So we're the fiscal agent. We're also the training division. So we train all the prosecutors in the state of Georgia. We also assist in training investigators and law enforcement officers. I have a total of 46 employees. 12 are lawyers who have a combined experience of 265 years. I also have 2 full-time investigators. I also have a gang resource prosecutor. He's one of the 12 lawyers. And just to let you know a little bit about what we're doing to help the district attorneys and local law enforcement combat gang violence. This year, PAC's gang prosecutor is currently providing local assistance on 11 cases within 7 judicial circuits. Our PAC-led prosecutions alone over the last year have secured more than 100 gang warrants. 77 of those are in Richmond County. The number of gang-specific trainings that we have done, including conferences this year, is 18 over the past couple of years. I will tell you this, when it comes to resources, we are in need of another Prosecuting Attorneys Council resource prosecutor. That resource prosecutor would be involved in animal abuse prosecutions, a resource prosecutor for animal abuse, because we have seen an increase in animal abuse prosecutions. And we've been called to have a number of trainings and to assist local DAs and solicitor generals. But one thing we have found out about animal abuse, it's closely tied to other crimes. It's closely tied to gang violence. It's closely tied to domestic violence. It's closely tied to human trafficking. We have that correlation, and it's proven correlation. So an animal abuse prosecutor or a resource prosecutor would help tremendously in assisting the DAs across the state of Georgia. Part of the mission of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council includes conflict cases. So as you know, we've been appointed to handle some conflict cases, one right here out of Atlanta. We've also handled conflict cases across the state. We also help pay for attorneys that when a district attorney or solicitor general cannot handle a conflict case, that comes out of our budget, and we pay that. We also may not get a conflict case, but a DA or a Solicitor General may reach out to us and say, can you handle this case for us? And at times we take on those cases. I've told you one of our missions is to train prosecutors and lawyers and, train prosecutors and law enforcement. In 2019, we had 108 total trainings. We trained a number of over 5,000 people. In 2020, which was our pandemic year, we had 143 trainings, and we trained 26,310 individuals. And we did that by transitioning from in-person trainings to webinars. So we managed to reach a number of people. And thus far in 2021, we have trained, we've had 124 total trainings, and we've trained 9,465 people. And the reason I think that's important is because prosecution and law enforcement is not static. It changes every day. Appellate decisions, Supreme Court decisions change every day. The officers need constant training. Prosecutors need constant training. Investigators need constant training as technology improves, as procedures improve, as we learn more, as we look at the communities, we understand that there's more we can do. And so that's why the training is an important component of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. One thing I want to talk about, and when you talk about crime, not only in Atlanta, but generally, is crime is a local issue. Your prosecutors, your DAs and solicitors, they're the ones that prosecute a vast majority of the crimes, probably well over 95, 96%. They're the ones that have to work with local law enforcement to make sure that you have boots on the ground, to make sure you have a timely process in which you're moving cases. One of the things that the pandemic has done, and this has affected, I think, not only Atlanta, but everybody, is when the courts have shut down, a number of things happened. One, we knew that the jails could not possibly keep bringing people in. So sheriffs made the determination that they had to keep their jails confined or open to the most violent of criminals. So there were a number of people that typically might be held in custody, maybe some repeat offenders, who were being given access to bonds so they could get out, so you would not have an overcrowding of the jails. And there's another reason that you wanted to make sure you kept your jail populations low during the pandemic, and that is the health costs that the counties must incur if you were to have an outbreak and if you had to send a number of people to be hospitalized. That, of course, would affect the bottom line of the counties. So that's one of the things that you have to take into account. But like I said, crime is a local issue, and it's the locals that have to do the majority of the battling when it comes to the criminal issues. The AG has concurrent and original jurisdiction on certain crimes, but the DAs and the Solicitor Generals, particularly the DAs, have jurisdiction on all cases, human trafficking, gang cases, things of that nature. And we have a unique system of justice in the United States. And that is that as far back as the 1700s, it was kind of decided that there ought to be local prosecutors. And then sometime around the 1800s, mid 1800s, 1830, a lot of those local prosecutors became elected positions. So in Georgia, like I said, you have 50 elected district attorneys who represent individual counties. Now, some may be multi-circuit like mine was. I had 5 counties in my circuit. Some may be single county circuits. For example, Douglas County, Fulton County. But the point is you had elected prosecutors who were there to represent their constituents and their people, and to make decisions based on a case-by-case basis of what cases ought to be prosecuted. DAs can prosecute RICO cases and human trafficking cases, and the issue always comes down to the limited resources that DA's offices have. Now, I will tell you, and I think many of you know this, is there is a difference in resources between the metro areas and the urban areas, and the rural areas. You will know that some DA's offices have the ability for a lot of county assistants and county personnel, whereas you have some rural DAs that the only people working in that office happen to be state-paid prosecutors or state-paid investigators. So there's a matter of resources that come to bear anytime you're talking about tackling crime. A majority of the cases are investigated by the sheriff's departments and police departments. State Patrol works the interstates, as you well know, and works a number of vehicular homicide cases, particularly in my circuit they did. But few agencies have the ability to specialize. You have many departments now that local law enforcement agencies that don't have the resources to specialize in gang prosecutions, in human trafficking and things of that nature. A priority of ours, a priority of any prosecutor's office, is being able to retain experienced prosecutors. Since the Great Recession in 2008, we've had experienced prosecutors who have been frozen in place, and we have lost. We have one of the largest vacancy rates that we've ever had, 7% vacancy rates in DA's offices. And a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that we no longer have a career path for people who choose to be in prosecution the way I did when I joined in 1984. I want to thank the House and thank Speaker Ralston for making that a priority this year, that we can not only be able to recruit, but retain experienced prosecutors to stay in the courtrooms. I say that because as an experienced prosecutor, I will tell you, a prosecutor with 3 to 5 years experience can handle 3 times the cases that a junior prosecutor can. A public defender who has experience can handle many more cases than a junior public defender who's just coming in. So it's essential, if you want cases moved in the justice system, it is essential that we have the ability to retain and recruit experienced prosecutors and to keep the ones that have stayed with us since the Great Recession in 2008. When you decide, my experience has been cases don't happen in a vacuum. Anytime you're talking about crime and anytime you're talking about the ability to prosecute cases, you really look at 3 types of individuals who commit crimes. You're looking at the first type of individual as a person who comes into contact with the criminal justice system. And that person, a lot of times, can be diverted. You can do it through pretrial intervention. You might be able to do it through first offender treatment. You might be able to do it with an accountability court, a drug treatment program, or things of that nature. But that person can be diverted and not be a constant participant in the criminal justice system. The second type of individual is the individual that is the repeat offender. And those are, again, you don't make a decision in a vacuum. That repeat offender, you have to deal with in different manners. The first time you encounter this repeat offender, you may give him pretrial diversion. The second time, he may get first offender. The third time, it may be an accountability court. But then the fourth time and the fifth time that you encounter a repeat offender, you have to take in consideration not only the public safety element of it, but also the community, the standard of living in the community. And that is, the community doesn't like to be victimized by someone, even if it's a low-level offense. And when you've encountered that person 4 or 5 times, that person must be separated from society for a period of time. It may not be a long period of time. It may be a short period of time. But the fact of the matter is, repeat offenders do constitute a majority of our cases. And then you have those who are violent offenders. And violent offenders are those that the resources are brought to bear by the DAs, by the sheriffs, by the State Patrol, by the GBI, by the local law enforcement agency to make sure these violent offenders are separated from our communities for as long as possible. And that's given within the confines of the statutes that you as a legislature pass. And so when you have these violent criminals, depending upon the type of crime it is, depending upon the act, depending upon the victim, depending upon the strength of your case, because if you don't have a strong case, it makes no sense to try to do something that you know you're going to fail at. But depending on the strength of your case, you want to separate that violent offender from the community for as long as possible for the purpose of rehabilitating him and for the purpose of making sure that your community is safe. So a prosecutor has a tremendous amount of discretion on how or she looks at a case, what he or she wants to do with the case. I have to agree with something the chief of police said at one of your prior hearings, is that we can't arrest our way out of the problems that are occurring today. We simply can't do it. What has happened was with the pandemic is we have had a perfect storm, so to speak, of repeat offenders and some violent offenders with access to firearms. We know that by statistics show that the more stops police make, the more search warrants they execute, they are encountering more and more individuals with firearms. And so we know there's firearms out there, but the increase in firearms alone doesn't account for what has happened in the violent crime. That is something that we're going to have to study for some time to see exactly what's going on. We also know that a lot of violent crime is not stranger on stranger. It's usually people who know each other. It's usually associated with domestic violence or could be any type of squabbles. But again, that doesn't stop the point that we have to separate violent criminals from our community. So that's one of the things we have to do. I think when this committee tackles the violent crime problem, you have to look at a number of different solutions. And that is, one is we have to get our courts operating again. The fact that courts are now coming back and we're starting to have jury trials and we can move cases will help deter, or I should say, prosecute some of those violent criminals. The fact, if we can get this COVID virus under control, the jails will be able to hold people a little bit longer, those that don't need to be out. And I'm not talking about everybody. It's so hard to address an issue like this when you're talking in big terms. But those people who are repeat offenders, those people who are violent offenders, they will be held probably longer by judges. Those people that have court dates that are coming up, those court dates will be held and they'll be moved. Those cases will be moved. There is a problem, though. The problem that I talked about earlier is our vacancy rate. When you don't have enough prosecutors in the courtroom and you have a tsunami of cases coming in now because of the pandemic, including the cases that were already filed prior to the pandemic, you've got to go whittle through those cases. And violent cases and cases of people in custody will take priority over other cases. So you have that as well. But you've got to have, one of the things about the criminal justice system, it's labor intensive. It doesn't matter how many computers you have in a DA's office. It doesn't matter how many patrol cars you have out on the street if they're not manned. It doesn't matter how many detective slots you have if they're not filled. It's labor intensive. You have to have investigators doing the work. Studies have shown that police presence is a great deterrent to crime, that police practices of identifying high crime areas and having police saturate those high crime areas is a great deterrent to crime. But you have to have that police presence. You have to have the ability to handle cases in a timely basis. You have to hold people accountable for the crimes they commit, and you must do that on a timely basis. And again, that takes investigators, patrol officers, assistant DAs, assistant public defenders, and judges in the courtroom who are operating on a continuous basis to make sure those cases get moved. Those are my opening comments, and I'm here to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions online before we go to those who are here. We'll recognize Representative Gloria Frazier at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
We've got you. Go ahead.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. I do have one question. Not a question, but just a verification. Initially, when you started the presentation, you mentioned about the gangs, and I was driving, so I did not get to hear the clarity part about the gangs. I hear the number 77, and I heard Richmond County. Could you just please clarify that for me so I can understand? I
Yes,
hope that's
ma'am.
not the number of gangs I have here. I'm here in Augusta.
Yes, ma'am. What I was talking about was our resource prosecutor at the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, and that this year we're assisting 7 judicial circuits and 11 different gang cases. Because of our resource prosecutor, we've taken out 100 gang warrants, and 77 of those were in Richmond County. It's an ongoing case.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that
You're welcome.
clarification.
Great. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Scandalakis? Anybody else online have anything they'd like to add? Let's see. Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. You said that you were losing prosecutors because there was no career path. Was there a path in the past? And then what happened with?
Yes, sir. There was a path in the past that we had a pay scale. And basically you knew if you stayed 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, that you would be moved up that pay scale. When the Great Recession hit in 2008, and obviously state revenues were down, we could no longer keep up with that pay scale. And we fell behind in a number of career prosecutors, mid-level and senior level prosecutors have been frozen in time, literally frozen in time. And the only thing we've been able to give them because of state budget has been an occasional cost of living increase. Now, I will say this, the legislature has been good to us. When other state agencies were losing people during the Great Recession, we did not lose people. We maintained, but we have not been able to keep those mid-level and senior level prosecutors moving up that pay scale. So for example, if you have 10 years, if you've been a prosecutor for 10 years and never left the DA's office, your salary today is $70,000. A starting assistant DA is $50,000. So over 10 years, despite the fact that you've gained all this experience, that you can handle almost any type of serious felony cases, you have basically been frozen for that long a time.
Is there not a supplement from the counties?
That's a great question. Yes, sir. Some counties do give supplements, but like I mentioned earlier, there are counties in which the DA doesn't get a supplement, neither does his staff, and the counties can ill afford to even give you county personnel. So there are a number of DAs a number of assistant DAs outside the metro areas and outside those counties that can afford supplements that get no supplements at all, which creates a problem too with assistant DAs sometimes moving from those counties that can give supplements, moving from counties that can't give supplements to counties that can give supplements. So that's a problem as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Scandalakis, for that very substantive presentation. I definitely appreciate it. And I have a few questions. One is, let me start with the issue of the lawyers. And to put that into context, starting salaries for first-year lawyers at a lot of places are above what you just stated tenure lawyers are receiving in terms of compensation, correct?
If you're a starting lawyer right out of law school and you're starting with a DA's office, it's $50,000. If you've been with us 10 years, it's $70,000.
But in the private sector is my
Oh, in the
comparison
private
purpose.
sector, it's far greater than that.
For first years coming out of law school can make far
Yes,
more than somebody with 10 years of experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I agree with you in terms of wanting to fix that problem, which seems like a state level intervention that we can and should tackle, because the more experienced people are, presumably better judgment they'll have, the more experience they'll have, and certainly the more efficient they'll be from just seeing lots of different problems and issues. But I want to delve down a little bit more into just what potential policy solutions we can have at the state level, recognizing your guidance that this is primarily a local problem. What we've heard throughout the hearings that we've had are a variety of reasons for challenges within the system. We've heard very little in terms of the actual causes giving rise to the increases in crime, but we've heard different issues within the system. We've heard there's issues with police. We've heard there's issues with prosecutors. We've heard there's issues with juries. We've heard there's issues with judges. With respect to prosecutors, what we just heard is one fix is the pay thing. It seems to me that in terms of the courts, the largest issue is the backlog from COVID. So perhaps, does it make sense to potentially surge retired judges or others once we can get courts back moving to help move cases through? Or are there any things that we can do to really help clear the backlog? And I don't know the answer to that, because if you add more judges but still have the same number of prosecutors, the availability of additional courtroom space and everything may not solve the issue. So do you have any ideas there of things that we can do to move these things along?
I think one thing we can do is, one, we're going to have to concentrate on violent criminals and those who have been in custody, because there have been people in custody now for a long period of time because of the shutdown in courts, that their cases need to be moved. And so you really have to be able to free up those career prosecutors who have the experience to work on those cases and somehow alleviate the caseload, the general caseload that those prosecutors have to handle. So my hope would be that we could find some additional funding to be able to supplement DA's offices for 2 or 3 years, maybe with contract prosecutors, to come in and handle those mundane things that need to be handled, so your career prosecutors can focus on those cases that need to be moved, the ones that have priority. And one of the things that some of the DAs are doing, and a number of DAs are starting to follow, is they are prioritizing their cases about what needs to be moved, and they are handling those most serious cases. But one thing, Representative Holcomb, that you hit upon is there's just so many courtrooms you can possibly have going at one time. And so that's going to be a problem. And there are just so many judges you can possibly have going at one time. Not to mention the extra burden that'll be placed on sheriff's departments for courtroom security, and the Department of Corrections and the Department of Community Service Supervision.
Right. Yeah, it's not an easy problem to solve. But with that, if I can ask just a couple more questions, because I think that you're helping to shape what we might be able to do here. What is your best sense in terms of what the drivers are that are increasing crime rates across the state and in the metro area?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a combination of, gosh, it's so hard to kind of put your finger on. We do know that for the past, even prior to 2020, we do know that the homicide rate has been going up a little bit, not as much as it jumped in 2020, but we do know that has been going up. And I think part of the problem is, one is, even when we had a low crime rate, you had a number, there's a lot of access to firearms. So, but even when you had a low crime rate, people were buying firearms. So it's not firearms by themselves that are obviously doing this, but you've had a crime rate that has been increasing over the past few years. Then you have the shutdowns of the courts, which means that there's been less accountability. And when I talk about accountability, I'm also talking about the fact that once you're arrested and you get a court date, if you can pretty much stay to that schedule, you pretty much know what the consequences are going to be, particularly if the police have the manpower to do an investigation and turn that over. So I think it's a combination of things. I also think that if you really want to tackle the crime rate, by the time the Atlanta Police Department gets an armed robbery or gets a homicide, by that time, it's really too late to tackle that crime rate. And what you really need to look at is, where did we fail prior to that? Was it in the juvenile court system? How many times has that person been in contact with the juvenile court system? Has that person been through the criminal justice system to the extent that you've tried diversion programs and they haven't worked, and you haven't held that person accountable for his or her actions prior to then? So, I don't have all those answers, like I said in the beginning, and I don't know that anybody does right now. There's a good article in the Washington Post by two criminologists, and I typically don't read the Washington Post, but this is a good article. And basically it says, we really don't know what's causing this increase in crime rate right now, but what we do know is there are a lot of factors that need to be looked at. And there's just no way to tell exactly why it's hit the way it's hit. You can't blame it all on the pandemic. You can't blame it on guns. You can't blame it all on the criminal justice system. You can't blame it all on the police. You can't even blame it all on the riots that occurred out west or even in the city of Atlanta. There's no one cause that has caused this surge in crime rate.
I agree with you. And if I could ask one last question, Mr. Chairman, I want to
Go
just
ahead, sir.
ask, which interventions, if we were to implement them, do you think would help the most to both address the crime rate and then these other issues that we've talked about in terms of the system, in terms of prioritizing all these different issues that have been raised? Can you help us to do that, to prioritize where you would spend?
I think everything, based upon my experience, everything I have seen, I will say that having police officers on the beat, police officers who are well-trained, who are well-educated, police officers who deal with the community, who are out there in the community, who make friends with the local neighbors. If you really want to address the crime rates, it's having police officers that are there in the communities. I can tell you just from my experience in LaGrange and working with Chief Lou Deckmar, when we had a problem in a community, Chief Deckmar would make sure his officers were the first ones to address those issues before it got to the DA's office. And so that has been my experience. If there's a good relationship between the police and the community, then the community wants to help the police because they want a safe. There's not a person around that doesn't want a safe community, safe schools, and a good place to raise their children. That's what they want. And they understand, a majority of people understand, to have that it's going to require police officers.
Thanks.
Thank you, Scott, for those questions. Good questions. Number 28 down here is.
When you went to work for the DA's office, or when a person goes to work for the DA's office, are you an employee of the county or are you an employee of the state?
When I went to work, I was an employee of the state. We had only one county employee for the entire 5-county circuit. But even if you're an employee of the county, you are recognized as a state prosecutor. Does that answer your question? Because you have some offices that you have state prosecutors in, but the county pays their salaries, but they're still recognized as state prosecutors.
The reason I asked the question, and this was posed to me just a little over a week ago by one of our local prosecutors, when he went to work for the DA's office, he was working an employee of the county and paid into the county retirement system for many years. Then when he became a DA, he now has a retirement system through the state. And his question was, and I don't know the answer to this, and you may not either because it's a retirement question, but you're talking about retention just little things that we might be able to do. Is it possible for him to buy back that time from the county so it could be in the state's retirement system?
I will have to check with my fiscal people. I think it is. But when I was DA and we started getting county employees, we literally had 7 different types of personnel policies. We had state employees, we had multi-county employees, we had county employees that belonged to one particular county. So you had all those different, I had 5 counties. So I had 5 different policies, 5 different retirement systems. You had the multi-county, which came under one policy, and then you had the state employees. And then we went to what is called a spacer program, that's state paid, county reimbursed. But the issue you have raised is a great issue. And if that person would like to reach out to me, I will get an answer for them.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else online have any comments? Chairman Powell is with us. Chairman Powell, can you hear me? Will you unmute it?
Hello?
We
Can
got
you hear
you.
me?
How things up in Hartwell?
Everything's lovely on the lake. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm not with y'all in person today. I got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask my dear friend, and he is my dear friend, and we worked together for years, and thank you for being there today, Pete. I listened to a lot of your comments, and a lot of this dealt strictly with the district attorneys and the prosecutorial end. But the prosecutorial end, if we're not having open courts and they're not operating, that's logging the system, jamming it down that much more. And I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and a lot of them is going to be more comments. I certainly want to put you on the spot with the high-ups in the judiciary. You know, I had some very strong disagreements with Judge Melton's orders 18 or so months ago, basically about shutting down the court system. You know, in the real world, even though we're living through a difficult time with the pandemic, you know, a lot of functions, people still went to work where they could. The General Assembly continued to meet. All of these areas went forward, but yet our courts were shut down. Big problems. And I would ask you, and I'm trying to get around to a point, and I'm trying to do it diplomatically, Pete. You know, this is about this committee's meeting on the specific crimes in Atlanta, and the overlap would be the crimes statewide. You know, a lot of us have predetermined thoughts about that in the metro area. You know, we've seen the lack of respect for law even by the political leaders there. We've seen officers that were prosecuted and taken to task with no due process for doing nothing more than their job in extraneous circumstances. And that was one of the problems. And the DA side, and I don't even guess I need to get into the former DA out there, but thank God for the people of Fulton County that they have moved forward. But there were some political issues that were there. And I think all of them led to a general disrespect, especially in the metro areas out there. If the courts opened up, in your opinion, and I won't be respectful in how I ask this, these courts need to be open full bore. I've talked to some of the judges out there that are just absolutely inundated in the lower courts. The traffic judges out there, they continue to have to deal with perpetrators who are running the streets at an excess of 100 miles an hour on surface streets in Atlanta and as such. Do you not believe that these courts could find a different way, whether it be with the social division or the distance in between folks, that they need to be out there prosecuting these cases on a simple traffic case of running too fast? What I understand in some of the metro courts, that these folks are posting bonds or not even given a bond, or excuse me, not even having to post a bond. But to me, it's creating a general level of disrespect that so many people think that there's no consequences for the actions. And at the end of the day, that's the reason we pass laws to have a certain level for society to know that these are the rules of society. How do you think we could move forward to start prosecuting these cases, even if it's in a lesser amount, so that it continues to go up? But we've got to start getting a grip on this in the metro area, and i.e. what migrates to the other parts of the state.
Chairman Powell, I know this, that, you know, we always talk about the courts shutting down. And when the court shut down, it was really not bringing in grand jurors and jurors, because I know just from my experiences, we kept working. We kept moving those cases that could be moved, kept having video bond hearings and things of that nature. Now I'm talking mostly about superior and state court. And you even had one county that would hold court. They called it deck court because they were in the parking lot holding court all the time in the parking deck. That was, I believe, Cherokee County called it deck court. So those cases continue to be moved, but the backlog was created when you reach those cases in which you need either a jury trial or you need an indictment. And one of the things the legislature did last year, as you recall, is you passed the statute that now allows DAs to file certain charges by accusations, and that's helping break the logjam too. I really can't speak as to traffic offenses because I do not have that much experience with traffic offenses, but I do know that, and this goes back to my first comments, is that there is no doubt when you look at the statistics that there are a number of individuals, a small percentage of individuals who commit a majority of the crimes, an even smaller percentage of individuals who commit the most violent crimes. And there's no doubt there is some lack of respect for law enforcement, but I know that the communities that I talk to, the communities that I come from, they love their law enforcement officers. They absolutely love them. And we cannot ignore the fact that there is some distrust for law enforcement in the African-American community. We can't ignore that. And it's based on some history. And we just have to bridge that gap. We have to figure a way to gain that trust back. And I did that as DA. I had to get that trust back. But as far as accountability, you know, there's an old saying, justice delayed is justice denied. And if you can't get those cases to court, it does create what you said as a lack of respect for the system. If you think you can get away with anything because we can't get to your case, it causes a problem in that community. Because once a person gets released back into the community, if he or she hasn't been held accountable for the act they occurred, guess who they victimize? They don't victimize the police again. They victimize the community that they've gone back to. And that's when we get the calls and we say, what are y'all doing? How come it's taken this long to get to court? So it's absolutely essential that we get the courts going full throttle again. And some of the delays I can't speak to.
Further question, Pete. And again, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you've been very straightforward and probably one of the brightest minds that I've run into in my 32 years in the legislature when it comes to prosecutorial issues. Do you have any suggestions in statutory changes? I know that several years ago, I think I might have been a hand of that, of being able to do certain court proceedings online. But do you see any legislative changes that we need to know that would open up these courts, whether it be, and I don't even know, I mean, I've got ideas, but I know that at the end of the day, the judges have their own minds, but anything that we could do legislatively and including and even including maybe the statutory changes for the penalties on these folks. I've listened to a couple of these hearings and also kept up through my role with public safety. But, when people perpetrate a crime, the lower levels are granted a bond in most cases, even to the point that now, as you had said a while ago, the jails are so packed, They don't even want to do bond. They're doing personal recognizance. Folks that probably will never show up again. These are the things that we need to put this ship back right. And I'd like to know if you have any specific recommendations for the legislature at this time. And if this puts you in a hot seat with judges, then if you would please forward those information on privately to some of us, we would be very grateful.
Chairman Powell, thank you very much. And yeah, I don't have any suggestions right now, but I'd like to get with my staff and maybe forward some to the committee and let y'all consider if that's acceptable with you.
That would be, because I think that while a lot of the issues that we're dealing with in this country today is due to this pandemic, which was a once in our lifetime affair, but we cannot let the world continue to shut down around us. We've got to move forward. We've got to, the criminal justice system continues to be in order, and it's got to go forward. If not, there'll be a total breakdown in all respect for law and order. And that's what I think we need to be looking at, including possible changes, despite what trial lawyers and despite what criminal defense lawyers and despite what DAs and judges may all disagree or agree. But we've got to move forward. It is a new day, and we're going to have to deal with these issues. And those are the things, if you could throw this out to your members, we would love to hear it.
Yes, sir. I will do. Thank you, Chairman Powell.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anyone else online have any comments or questions? I do have one question I'd like to ask you. We've taken some steps to help alleviate some of the problems that we've seen with backlog of evidence through the GBI. Are you seeing some of that? Is that kind of working itself out now, or is that still hindering the prosecution of some cases? Or what's your opinion on that?
I sure appreciate you asking me that question, because I meant to bring that up. The GBI is under-resourced and it's underfunded, and some of the steps y'all have taken has helped tremendously. I will tell you, they still need medical examiners, and I know Director Reynolds has pointed out that there's going to be money in the budget, hopefully, to hire some medical examiners. We only have one forensic firearms examiner that I'm aware of, and so a number of cases the DAs have talked about is being backed up because we can't get our firearms examined in a timely manner. Now, you can call the GBI and they will move things up front, but I know that's a need, a forensic firearms examiner. And also, we are now outsourcing certain drug cases, and we're also outsourcing DNA cases. And sometimes we have a little bit of an issue, which the GBI works well with us. I'm not saying the issues with the GBI, but when you outsource DNA and trying to get an expert from another state to come down here, that poses a problem at times too. And those are delays that we have to look for. Not only does it pose a problem, but it also poses an additional expense to the state and to the county in trying to get experts at times. But again, the GBI has been great working with us and the DAs, but a well-funded crime lab is essential.
Again, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very
for what you're doing.
And if I could put in one more plug for the State Patrol, one of the units that I always used for the State Patrol was their skirt team, special collision reconstruction team. I don't know how many skirt officers they have now, but that was one of the specialized units that works vehicular homicides and serious injuries by vehicle. They absolutely could use additional troopers for that as well. And I hope the Colonel doesn't mind me saying that.
I'm sure he doesn't. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much for being with
I
us.
appreciate so much being able to be here.
And I would like to encourage members of this committee at any time, if you have questions that you think Director Skandalakis can provide you information. I know he has an open door policy there with his organization. He's more than willing to help. So thank you very much. At this time, we're going to digress back to our first item for the agenda, the Moms Demand Action. I think we have her back now and she's ready to speak. If you would introduce yourself to the committee. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you hear
I
me?
can hear you. Thank you.
Great.
Please.
So Chairman Collins and Vice Chairman Mathis and Public Safety Committee members, thank you for holding this hearing and for allowing public testimony. My name is Adrienne Pennick. I'm a constituent who is concerned about the surge in gun violence and violent crime here in Atlanta. I'm a resident of Sandy Springs. I'm a working professional. I'm a graduate student at Georgia Tech. I'm the mother of 3 children, and I'm also a volunteer with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, which is a nonpartisan organization that's dedicated to reducing gun violence. So today I wanted to appear before this committee to present an actionable step that you can take to address this crisis directly. As you know, cities across the country, not just in Atlanta, are experiencing a surge in gun violence and violent crime, partially as the result of the COVID pandemic, which you've heard from other testimonies. This pandemic, which is the worst public health crisis in over a century, has exacerbated stressors in people's lives, such as income and housing inequality, job loss or job insecurity, and has created persistent family stress, all of which can be root causes of gun violence. So these acute areas in people's lives, when they're left unresolved, are issues that often end up resulting in violence. And so I'm here today to bring your attention to an actionable solution that Georgia lawmakers can take to provide much needed resources to community-based violence intervention programs. I want to discuss what you can do, how you can do it, and the impact that you might be able to make to address the current rise in violence and help restore public safety. Georgia is receiving almost $5 billion in funding from the American Rescue Plan recovering funds, with additional funding coming in at both the city and the county levels. As a result, this Public Safety Committee has the opportunity to recommend that the governor commit a portion of those funds to local gun violence intervention programs. With an increase in funding, these organizations can expand their work immediately to address our city's public safety crisis. Community-based violence intervention programs already have successful relationships in their local communities. And for decades, community organizers have successfully reduced violence by leveraging these relationships and implementing public safety measures that are locally driven and informed by data. They already have the programs in place, yet they do not have the funding necessary to dramatically reduce the current wave of city violence. They don't have the funding to expand operations to meet the pandemic-fueled surge in violence. And at the last hearing, we heard from experts in the fields of law enforcement, public safety, and intelligence, many of whom endorsed the concept of local on-the-ground intervention. Other cities and states across the country have decided to invest federal COVID relief funds from the American Rescue Plan to violence intervention programs. And Georgia has the opportunity to do the same thing. Even in the midst of this pandemic, many organizations have expanded their work to provide essential services, all while they have been facing unprecedented demand for their services, coupled with significant funding shortfalls. There are many incredible violence disruption organizations for you to consider. And today I'd like to highlight just a few to illustrate what these organizations do and to allow you to envision how, if they are allowed to expand their operations, they can directly address the surge in violence in Atlanta and the surrounding communities of Georgia. So first, right here in downtown Atlanta, Grady Memorial Hospital's PIVOT program has a need for funding. PIVOT stands for a program to interrupt violence through outreach and treatment. As a pilot program, PIVOT worked closely with local law enforcement, with Grady's emergency department staff, and community mentors to interrupt the cycle of recurring gun violence with gunshot victims aged 18 to 35. They provided technical job training, job access, housing assistance, and mental health intervention to break the cycle of repeated violence. You'll notice that these are several elements that, if left unresolved, can become root causes of future violent crime. Despite promising initial results, however, this work stopped due to funding shortages in 2020, and the state could change this with an allocation from the ARP. Next, there's an organization called Chris 180, who is focused on interrupting street violence in the neighborhoods southwest of Atlanta. They do so through mental health intervention, which is a solution that several committee members here have recommended. CHRIS is an acronym for Creativity, Honor, Respect, Integrity, and Safety. CHRIS 180's neighborhood planning units have seen homicide and violent assault decrease in areas they serve, even while violent crime was rising across the rest of Atlanta. With additional funding from the ARP, they would be able to expand their reach and interrupt street violence before it escalates. These are just a few of the many violence intervention groups that have been working to address the root causes of gun violence. And I'd be happy to work with anyone here to recommend others. But today I wanted to give you a picture of the type of work that can be funded through the American Rescue Plan to meet this moment of crisis. You have the ability, without any additional legislation necessary, to help reduce the surge of violence in Atlanta and other Georgia communities. Funding local violence interrupters can meet the concerns of your constituents, can direct resources toward curing the root causes of violent crime, and hopefully make an immediate impact on public safety in Atlanta and the surrounding communities. So thank you for the opportunity to present this option, and I sincerely hope you will consider funding violence intervention programs to increase public safety for all Georgians. Thank you.
We appreciate you being here with us. Do you have time to take any questions the committee
Sure.
members may have?
I have a couple minutes.
Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that presentation, and I have a couple of questions for you. The first is, do you have any sense of the potential dollar figures or recommendations in terms of the dollar figures for supporting these groups?
That's a great question. And I'd be happy to kind of get back to you on those figures. I'm sure it would depend on the type of the organization, their needs, and their ability to expand within the local community.
Okay.
But certainly there is room in the ARP for that funding.
And the second one is, I heard that you say that initial reports or initial work and interventions were showing promising results. Can you describe for us how that is being measured? Like what are the standards that they're using? What are the variables that they're using? Like what's the process by which they're evaluating the work that they're doing to make sure that the investment of money is working?
At Grady's Pivot program, there's a pretty extensive white paper on the initial results that I'd gladly forward to your office, but they were looking at, so the intention behind that program is to interfere with kind of the recurrence of violence. So oftentimes if someone is in a trauma unit as the result of a gunshot, that person, there's a kind of a retaliatory nature, and that person goes out and tends to retaliate and commit violent crime. And the Pivot program works with individuals on job placement, mental health training, substance abuse, whatever their needs are, to try and interrupt that cycle. And so they measure the kind of the recurrence of violent crimes from people who are dismissed from the hospital. And there's a lot of statistics behind it on the initial pilot results.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else online have any comments or questions?
Uh,
Representative Evans.
Yes, thank you so much. Hey, Chair. And thank you so much, Adrian, for coming today. And I'm sorry I can't be with my colleagues in person today. I just wanted to state my support for the state using some of the ARP funds for this type of violence interruption programs. And I was talking with a Grady healthcare expert, and he was saying that these are teachable moments. This is when someone's been shot, there's this, it's a time where we can make a change in their lives before they go back out to their community. So I do hope that this is something we can take action on. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We certainly appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you.
This time, we're going to transition on to our next presenter. We have Colonel Wright with us today, and other members of Department of Public Safety. Colonel Wright, if you'd like to please come forward. Yes, please. I spoke with Colonel Wright last week and I asked him if he would give us an update as to some of the activities that the Department of Public Safety, not just the State Patrol, but everyone under his leadership. Talk about some of the things that they've been doing. Colonel, the floor is yours. Go ahead. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today and update you on our efforts to reduce crime in the Atlanta metro area since the last committee hearing on July the 19th. The Department of Public Safety has continued to work with the GBI, DNR, DCS, and our local partners to help fight crime in the Atlanta area. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce the gentleman to my left. This is Captain Richie Howard. Captain Howard is the Troop C commander, which is the area that encompasses the Atlanta metro area. It's our troop here locally. Captain Howard is the boots on the ground commander, if you will. He is the guy that is very instrumental in overseeing this operation and all the operations that we oversee in the Atlanta metro area. As you can see from the spreadsheet we provided, our efforts continue to be successful. These numbers reflect the hard work and dedication of our state law enforcement professionals. Proactive policing and high visibility patrols work in reducing crime and apprehending criminals. It is the key to successful policing and safer communities. I'd like to highlight some of the statistics from our efforts. They're included in your packet. Troopers have conducted to date 10,953 traffic stops, which has resulted in 7,618 citations being issued, 285 DUI arrests, 207 reckless driving charges, and 302 vehicle pursuits. I'd also like to point out the 8,204 warnings that have been issued, which I think is important because that demonstrates the level of compassion and discretion our troopers continue to exhibit. We also apprehended 188 fugitives. 11 of those were murder suspects. There were 60 weapons recovered during this time period. And there's also been 144 stolen vehicles recovered. The estimated value of those vehicles is over $2.2 million. A total of 636 vehicles have been impounded during this operational period. We've been asked many times where the suspects appear to be located as far as what state they reside in. I can tell you that since we began our operation on April the 9th, 83% of the citations that have been issued were Georgia license holders. 17% of those citations were out-of-state license holders. I'd also like to mention that in addition to our efforts in the Atlanta metro area, we held a crime suppression detail just this past weekend in Macon, Bibb County. The effort resulted in 298 traffic stops, 350 citations, 168 warnings, 23 DUI arrests, 4 reckless driving charges, 7 fugitives were apprehended, and 34 vehicles were impounded. I'd also like to mention that while this is kind of early in the week after this operation, but during this time period, Macon Bibb County is telling us that they had a reduction in their a half reduction in their calls for service, and they also experienced no shootings over the weekend. We also included in our packet, Mr. Chairman, a sampling of some of the incidents that our troopers and officers have been involved in. And this is just a sampling of what they see and what they encounter. We call these unusual occurrences. But this will give you an idea of what they are seeing on the ground and what they are encountering and how they are handling themselves in some of these situations. These are not incident reports. These are just little snippets of what you can see. I'd like to personally thank all the DPS personnel and our partners for the tremendous efforts in this crime suppression detail. The work that they are doing is honorable, it's meaningful, and they are making a difference. So I'd like to thank all the men and women that have been involved, and all the men and women who wear a uniform. Thank you for all that you do. I'd like to inform the committee also that last week during our DPS board meeting, I asked the board to approve the creation of a permanent crime suppression unit. The board unanimously approved this request. The crime suppression unit will be comprised of 10 full-time members whose sole mission will be to work in the metro area to reduce crime and apprehend violent offenders. DPS remains committed to carrying out Governor Kemp's vision of combating violent crime and will leverage the resources necessary to accomplish this mission. We share the governor's vision that safer communities across our state will continue to make Georgia the #1 state to live, work, and raise a family. If we are not a safe state, businesses will not come here. People will not move here, nor will they visit. I'd like to close by offering an invitation to any committee member or legislator to participate in a ride along with one of our troopers or officers. You can contact me and I will facilitate that ride along. I believe participation in a ride along would provide very valuable insight into what and how we're doing to suppress crime. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you. We do have some questions from committee members, I believe. We'll start off with Representative Holcomb there, #1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions. What's helping you solve the stolen car issue? Is it the cameras or something else?
That's called proactive police work. It's actually putting boots on the ground, stopping vehicles, and enforcing the traffic laws.
Can you explain it a little bit more, like how you're getting there in terms of, are you pulling them over because you know that the vehicle is stolen?
We
or
do
you're-
know some vehicles are stolen, that we get hits on them from the LPRs. We also get notifications from our partners like APD when they know and they see a particular vehicle that is stolen, and they're watching that particular vehicle and they know that the criminals have that vehicle. So yes, I mean, it's a partnership combined with the license plate reader hits, but it's also just like you described. It's being very proactive, stopping speeding motorists, addressing traffic issues.
Okay. Thank you. And the next question is, what do you see as the primary drivers behind the spike in crime rates right now?
Well, I like Mr. Scanilakis pointed out, I think it's a combination of numerous things. And, for us, I think one of the issues is we're having a huge problem with recruiting and retention. We have fewer state troopers on the road. We have fewer police officers on the road. And when you have fewer law enforcement visibility, fewer law enforcement officers on the road, you see an increase in crime, you see an increase in traffic fatalities, which we are seeing both of right now.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else here in the committee? #25 down here. Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation, and also thank you for the efforts that you're putting in to combat crime here in the state of Georgia. We really appreciate these efforts.
Thank
And I also like the backlight that you got over the city, that we can call the state troopers to come whenever we need them. But just want to commend you on a job well done and the effort that you put forth in the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Representative Jackson. We included that photo. That photo came to us. It actually came through some of the news media outlets. We don't know who drew that or who made that, but it was sent to us, we presumed, as a thank you for the hard work that our folks are doing.
It's impressive.
One question I have for you, Colonel, if you don't mind, when you were talking about your community partners calling you and informing your agency that there's a stolen vehicle, is that an agency calling to say, hey, this is a stolen vehicle, we want you to find it, or is it something that they are not willing to pursue themselves? as far as stopping, making a stop. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think from Major Lamb's presentation last time, you learned that it's a partnership with our agency and many other agencies, including the Atlanta Police Department. And many times on the weekends, the Atlanta Police Department members, some will ride with our troopers. And that's a valuable partnership in that they have a lot of local knowledge and a lot of specific knowledge about where their crime issues are. And it gives them the ability to, it gives our officers the ability to have immediate backup as well. And so I think a lot of times they clearly know some of the areas, they know where some of the stolen vehicles may be, they locate them. And of course, we do have that ability to pursue. And I know the chief has changed some of their policies, I think, too, to where it allows them to do some pursuits as well. But clearly our people, they're well trained in pursuits. And so that they've done a tremendous job in apprehending some of these suspects.
I understand. Captain Howard, do you have anything you'd like to add today? We certainly appreciate you taking the time to be here with us, and you're right there in the trenches day in and day out too.
Well, good afternoon. I think for the opportunity and offer greetings to everyone in their respective places on the committee. In conjunction to the questions asked, I do want to make comments on the support that we're offering. Is not a single agency that's able to tackle the things that we're dealing with today. So that combination and the support and the teamwork that we're getting, not only from our local partners, but through our state partners, is definitely helping and getting and combating the crime that we're seeing today.
We have two committee members online to have comments or questions. Start off with Representative Evans. You have something you want to ask or add to?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you so much, Colonel. It's so nice to see you here today. Thank you so much to both of you for your work for all of us in Georgia. I wanted to ask you about staffing, and I'm remembering from our presentation before that Georgia Safety Patrol, like how much do we budget? How much staff do we budget for statewide? And then how many people are we supposed to have ideally? And then how many do we have right now statewide for?
Yes, ma'am. We are budgeted for 860 troopers. We have a goal and have had a goal to get to 1,000 troopers since I've been on the agency 28 years now. We're currently at our staffing on our patrol side at 753 troopers.
Thank you. And then if I may ask a follow-up, so this crime suppression unit, that's in addition, those are additional positions, is that right?
Yes. So we've since we started this operation in April the 9th, as you know, we've been bringing in some additional resources along with with Captain Howard's Troop C personnel. We also stood up a detached unit of 6 members of the crime suppression unit. So what this 10-man unit will do now is those 6 men will move to a full-time unit, and we're gonna add 4 additional personnel, and their sole mission and sole function will be just crime suppression. In other words, they won't be involved in responding to traffic crashes and the other normal duties that they would be responding to. This will be their sole mission every day that they come to work, working in the metro area.
Yes, and then just to clarify, so the 860 troopers is what we're budgeted for, and we don't, and then so now it's another. Is the 10 person unit part of that 860, or is it in addition to?
We are handling that within our budget. We just simply had to ask the board to move to create that full-time unit in our org chart, if you will.
All right, thank you so much.
Chairman Powell.
Let's see, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Captain Howard for the job that y'all are doing out there. This is certainly unprecedented times. in one municipality and in several others that we specifically had to call in extra law enforcement. And it's very well needed. So not only do I thank y'all, but I thank each and every man and woman that wears it, serves under the color of the badge of Georgia, whether it be ECC officers or our DNR officers. Each and every one of these have a responsibility. And to my knowledge, everyone that I know takes it very serious. But I want to thank you for the answer a couple of things. The handout that you have provided for the enforcement efforts there in the Atlanta area. I think you said it right about how y'all are stopping some of these vehicles. But as I look down that list, there's a litany of other crimes. And generally, if someone is stopped for cause, then if there's something else that comes up. So it tells me that what's needed more than anything is that we have got to boost our numbers, especially in this day and time for law enforcement. Where you see it's not just the smaller numbers of drug arrests and things, but stolen guns, stolen cars, drug arrest, wanted persons. That's an interesting one to me, that there was 188 people who were wanted criminals. And it appears to me that what we need more boots on the ground. For years, I know that we've always had a certain level, a certain number of officers that are on the ground, excluding admin staff, but we've always had budgeted for others. And at some point, and I look forward to hearing your comments, but how we need to boost this up, not just for the state patrolmen, but for all of them, because we have other agencies who they aren't on the same pay scale, which has created a certain level of animosity, I think, between agencies. So we need to go to a unified pay scale. And my question to you do you agree that we need to go to a unified pay scale for our officers?
I do think there has to be a conversation about pay, and a conversation that is more consistent among state law enforcement, for sure. But I also think you have to take into account the level of duties that certain agencies do as well. But yes, sir, you are correct. There does need to be a conversation about that. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Still there? Did I lose you?
No, go ahead, Mr. Chairman. We still have you.
Thank you. I think under the previous testimony, it was pointed out by one of the speakers that there was some $5 billion in ARP fund or ARP funds. And they were talking at that time about putting this money in places such as violent intervention. But first and foremost, I tend to believe that the first obligation of government is the public safety. That's what creates anarchy. And that's what we need to be dealing with at this time, whether it be raising the number of uniformed officers, the pay scale, a uniform pay scale amongst all of our state law enforcement officers that are doing the same job. But I just want to thank each and every one of you. I want to thank Representative Jackson for his comments just a minute ago, because there's a lot of us across party lines that we do stand unified behind the public safety efforts of this state. And please forward our thanks to the committee, and I'm sure they would appreciate hearing from all the committee of our appreciation to y'all for the job y'all are doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anyone else? Okay. Again, Colonel, thank you for being here with us today. And we know we can call on you in future hearings to give some more testimony and shed some more light on what you're doing.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. This time we're going to hear from APD. I think we have members of the Atlanta Police Department here with us today, including the chief and assistant chief. Is that correct? Your deputy chief, come on. appreciate your willingness to be here with us today. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Collins and members of the committee. Appreciate you allowing Chief Brian and I to be able to present today. My name is John Keene. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the City of Atlanta. And I have the opportunity to lead and support the 15 operating departments for the City of Atlanta. I've been at the City of Atlanta for 3 years. Prior to that, I worked in the public sector, private sector, as well as I was an Army officer. At the City of Atlanta, as you all hopefully know, addressing violent crime continues to be our top priority and certainly continues to be a challenge. Homicides and aggravated assaults are specific areas of concern because while our overall Part 1 crimes are down compared to 2019, homicides and aggravated assaults remain higher. We greatly appreciate the hard work and leadership of the Atlanta Police Department each and every single day to aggressively pursue solutions. We work to ensure that all of our city agencies and all possible partners support their efforts to address violent crime. As mentioned, the mayor identified reducing crime as our top priority this year, including a budget increase of 15% and the commitment of American Rescue Plan funds to public safety initiatives. Today, I'll highlight a few of our priority initiatives and actions, and then I'll turn it over to Chief Bryant to discuss additional details on our actions and our data. First, one of our top priorities is hiring additional police officers. This is a highly competitive hiring environment for law enforcement, as you all have already heard today, but we've taken actions to improve our processes and offer a leading compensation package and competitive incentives. These efforts have proven to make a difference as we have increased our hiring rates and we are on track to meet our annual hiring targets. Second, another top priority is the expansion of our Operation Shield camera network. We set a goal to expand that network by 250 cameras by December of 2021. We will exceed this goal and we've already funded 300 additional cameras. These cameras, as you all have already heard, play an important role in our ability to deter and respond to crime. Finally, I want to mention the recent recommendations from the Anti-Violence Advisory Council that the mayor convened. This advisory council was part of our ongoing efforts to review, learn, adapt, and improve how we address the challenge of violent crime. The advisory council was composed of diverse representatives from business, the community, law enforcement, with input from leading experts in the field of violence reduction. Overall, their recommendations provided clear guidance on ways to further coordinate, focus, and invest in key violence reduction initiatives. This included focused investment in community-based violence interventions like the ones that you heard about earlier, which have proven to be effective at breaking the cycle of retaliatory violence and working with communities on enforcement and non-enforcement related actions. Lastly, the recommendations from the council also included expanding and further focus on our efforts to address repeat offenders. Again, an issue that you all heard about today. This is a coordinated effort with the county district attorney's offices, the county sheriff's offices, and the Georgia Department of Community Supervision. We greatly appreciate the partnership and support from many federal, state, and local organizations, including the Georgia State Patrol, and we're working with all of them to address violent crime within the city of Atlanta. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Brian. He's going to further expand upon our partnerships, the actions we're taking, and the data.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chairman and the committee, for convening this meeting to address some of the issues that we're seeing in the city of Atlanta and the metro area, as well as throughout the country. I first would like to thank Mr. Skandalakis, because I think that his introduction on what we're seeing overall as it relates to crime is repetitive of what we have said from my position and many positions in the mayor's administration as to how we find ourselves in this position. But First of all, I want to talk about our partnerships with our federal, state, and local partners. This was one of the first things that we started to do, was to make sure we were able to establish a strong partnership with all entities so that we can have an aggressive front on being able to address what we were seeing as it relates to violent crime. So Chris Wright, Colonel of Georgia State Patrol, is no stranger to me. Vic Reynolds, the director of the GBI, is no stranger to me as well. Chris Hacker, the SAC of the FBI. All of us really talk quite regularly to address some of the issues that we're seeing in the city of Atlanta. Once we were able to establish that partnership, Chris Hacker and I established the initiation of Operation Phoenix. Operation Phoenix was a strategy that we put together to be able to take the most violent offenders that we were seeing off of the street. This is not what was asked of us by President Biden. We actually initiated this in the city of Atlanta 6 months prior to this being something that the federal department created. We immediately recognized that if we took violent offenders off of the street, being that we were seeing a lag in our systems here locally, that this was the quickest and the most expedient way to take violent offenders off of the street. Once we did that, the level of gun violence that we began to see in the city of Atlanta did change. We were seeing more multiple shootings at higher levels. Once we start taking these people off of the street, putting them in the federal system, that level changed. And we then began to get back into all of our federal task force, from the Joint Terrorism Task Force to HIDA, every single task force that we have, we separated ourselves from. We began to work together and work around the disagreements that we had as it relates to body-worn camera. We recognized that it was our level of resources that we needed for us to really function more effectively. We're still in the process of hashing out some of those issues that we can go into full operation in these task forces, but we are actually back into many of them. Simultaneously, one of the things that we had to continue to do was work on the morale of our police department. As many of you know, it was no one thing that actually had an impact on what we were seeing in the city of Atlanta. This was very similar in many states, in many large metropolitan police departments, with a morale because of the civil disturbance and things that were directed towards police departments. We saw the attrition began to take an effect on our police department. So we recognized we had to address the morale of our police department. We did this by, again, working with the mayor's office to come up with ways to incentivize the people that remain, as well as having the staff go out and have conversation with our people in the field and doing roll calls and having group sessions of conversation. Additionally, one of the things that we recognize is we had to better align some of the services that we had internally within the police department. This is putting more units that were operated in like fashion closer together under one division. We thought that it was important that we do this to allow them to be more effective. Where we saw this is in our, once we established, working with the mayor's office, our nuisance property list, we put our code enforcement and our license and permits unit together because they work so closely hand in hand. What this allowed us to do was we were seeing after last year a lot of violent crime around nightclubs and restaurants that operated at nightclubs. So we knew that if we were able to address them more aggressively, that we could start to see that violence come down. In doing so, we have begun to see that level of violence, especially in the downtown, in the Buckhead space, really take a significant hit. Quite often, and the issue has been brought up, not just with us, but as well as Georgia State Patrol and John spoke about where we were with our level of staffing. We knew that for us to get out of where we are, we have to readdress our background in recruitment. We've been working with the mayor's office and John's office to make sure that we have the most aggressive platform going forward as it relates to us doing background and recruitment. We are in a very unique time as it relates to law enforcement. This is probably the first time in our country where almost every major law enforcement agency find themselves in a space of doing background and recruitment. So we're all looking for very similar talents. I've spoken quite frequently in the state that we would generally go get a number of people from the city of New York because New York had such a long waiting list. New York now see themselves also in recruiting during this particular time. So our repositioning on how we are managing background and recruitment has begun to improve. And I think that we still got a long road to go, but things have begun to improve in that space. Our street racing collaboration, this is something, again, a phenomenon that was birthed just prior to the COVID-19 era, but it exacerbated itself while many people were not traveling on the roads. And this is the way that people with these fast cars would get out because the roads were vacant. It required us to change our strategy on how we would be more proactive. We now had to stand up and address street racing, but it did strengthen our relationship with the Georgia State Patrol because now we were having a partner in this space as well as in other areas. But it also allowed us to work with our outside metropolitan police departments more closely because they were seeing the exact same things as it relates to street racing. And then we had to implement one of the things that's unique to the city of Atlanta is we have to restructure our operating offenses, proactiveness based on the seasoning of times. So as we rolled into the summer, we had to put our summer plan into place. Our summer plan allowed us to target areas that we were seeing where we would generally see more activity during the summers. This would be mostly our malls, our shopping areas, and our downtown space. Once we were able to redirect our resources there, as well as our Edgewood community, where we were seeing gun violence play out in those areas as well. Once we put our summer plan into place, we do believe that it did have an impact on us reducing some of the level of violence that we were seeing just the year prior. Additionally, at the direction of the mayor, one of the things that we were able to do was work with PERF to come up with better strategies and ideas as it relates to what we were seeing and how we could better operate our police department. There's a thing that I have that's called the Chief's Kitchen Cabinet through PERF. It gives me the opportunity to talk to chiefs throughout the country to get different ideas on how we can better not just operate our police department, but also address violent crime. We meet regularly. I'm talking to several major city chiefs who find themselves in this exact same space, and we are able to take ideas from each other and implement that as well. Additionally, one of the things I thought that it was important, I think that Mr. Skandalakis talked about this as well, is making sure that we are communicating with the public, that the people that we serve. I have what is called a advisory commission from both nonprofit as well as commercial, and then a citizen advisory committee. In these committees, we have conversation about issues that we are having to address that's important to them, both nonprofit, private businesses, as well as the citizen. And what we recognize is this is not just a way for us to be able to tell them what we're doing, but to hear from them on what is important to them, and then for us to have a working strategy and solution to the problems that we may see. And then I thought that it was important that we restructure our department as a whole. And so what I did was with the executive team, restructure and centralize our investigation units. What this will give us the ability to do is for our investigative teams to have more collaboration and accountability and ability to share information. In doing this, I created the repeat offender unit inside our department as well. As you heard prior to my speaking, Mr. Skandalakis thought that repeat offenders was a significant problem as it relates to how we address crime. I thought that it was important that we have a unit specific to addressing those issues as we see them in the city of Atlanta. Additionally, we were starting to see, due to COVID-19, we saw out of all the crimes that we saw increase, domestic violence was the one that jumped up the most. And we established a domestic violence unit as well to address what we were seeing in that space. As of late, one of the things that we gave me the ability to do was restructure internally what we were doing as it relates to violent crimes. And so we created the violent crime initiative section within the police department. Inside this section, we reestablished our narcotics unit because what we're seeing currently is a lot of the violence is stemming around marijuana sales. So our narcotics unit and our Titan unit, which was previously our Apex unit, now have a redirection on making sure that they are actually targeting and having greater enforcement and investigation as it relates to narcotics. Additionally, previously we had the intelligence unit. That intelligence unit has always been the gang unit, but we renamed it and refocused it and gave them more instructions as it relates to enforcement. What they were previously doing is working in many of the different task forces throughout the metropolitan area as it relates to gangs and sharing information. What I wanted them to be able to do is not just share the information, but have a more aggressive means of enforcement as it relates to gangs. What that looks like is when we see know of an area where there's gang activity, that we have an enforcement objective in eradicating and dismantling those gangs in that particular area. And so that's how we're moving forward now. So right now, again, as John stated, we aren't running from the fact that we are seeing a significant problem as it relates to gang violence. Homicides, murder rates in the city of Atlanta, and aggravated assaults. Those are the areas that we really rely on our outside partners and our federal and state partners in addressing. I think that this type of conversation gives us the ability to share our issues and for all of us to come up with great ideas to address them going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for your work you're doing to make our capital city a more safe city. I think we have some questions from our committee members at this time. Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for your presentation, and I have some questions. With respect to the violent crime and particularly the murderers, has there been any statistical analysis done in terms of whether or not those are crimes by people who know the victims, or is it just randomness? Because I think that there's a big concern that it's just randomness, but we're also hearing that more often than not, individuals are known to themselves. So Absolutely. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. Yes, more than 80% of the individuals that are involved in violent crimes know each other. There's a smaller portion in the outlining portion of that 20%. There was some level of encounter prior to that homicide. There's very little stranger on stranger homicides that we have in the city of Atlanta.
Okay. And then it sounds like you agree with the general statement, which I've been asking throughout this process, that nobody really knows the precise drivers that are giving rise to the increases at this time. However, there are certain variables that impact crime rates. So can you talk just generally about the variables that you think are most important and what the state might be able to do to be supportive in addressing those?
Again, I think that if any of us had the answer to what was the actual driver, we'd throw all our resources at reducing it. What we're seeing in Atlanta is the level of the greatest increase we're seeing as it relates to violent crime is conflict resolution. A great majority of that is where two people, when I'm getting my text on what happened, two people had an argument and it turned into gunplay. And so more than 80% of our homicides, almost upwards of 90% of our homicides are from gunplay. And I was attributed to that to just guns being in the hands of the wrong people. And we need to come up with a better way to address that on how do we not have so many weapons in the hands of people who don't know how to use a gun.
What ideas do you have for that?
There are a number of ways, I think. One, we have to be more aggressive as it relates to when an individual is arrested for having a weapon that shouldn't have had it. I'm all for people not being harshly punished for an incident. But when you utilize a gun one time and we're giving people minor punishment for something like that, and then we have to deal with it again, it is problematic. It's disheartening to the men and women of the police department, but it's also disheartening to a community where they're now dealing with a person who not only shot one person, but shot two people. And we're facing those again. I think that we have to address it that way on the back end, but on the front end, we have to have some way of having communications with teaching people on what they need to do. But then additionally, I'd be remiss if I didn't speak that we are now getting a new ATF director. I've been in contact with him, and he and I will be meeting this week to come up with even more strategies on how we're able to do that.
And my last question, you caught my attention with the rise in domestic violence numbers, and that's something that I've been reading about and noticing as well. Can you provide any description about what you're seeing there in terms of the volume? And also, I'd be curious to know if firearms are a frequent issue with domestic violence cases that you're dealing with now.
Yes. So anecdotally, I can only assume that it's due to people not having the same social outlets that we had 2 years ago, and that the confinement of people just not being able to resolve those level of conflicts. But we're seeing it when I say domestic violence, it's not just mate on mate. It could be child, brother and sister. It could be relatives of two different family members. I mean, we're seeing it play out. Just this past weekend, two of our multiple shootings were both domestic related. And that's problematic. It's very hard to address when family members turn guns on each other.
Thank you.
Anyone else online have any questions or comments? Chairman Powell.
Cut that off. Chief, thank you so much for being there today. And I do appreciate your comments. First, I want to thank you. At our last meeting, you had your deputy chief there, and I thought he did an excellent job. At that time, I had asked for a readout sheet of the types of crimes that had been perpetrated and the resolution to them, and I'd still like to get a copy of that if possible. So thank you so much for that. It appears that what we have is and it's probably more to the more metro areas about this, the effects of the COVID and everything else. But would you think that possibly with the influx of new citizens that have come into Atlanta in the last 15 years, that has been part of the problem with so many people moving in as a melting pot? And a lot of them quite frankly, absolutely don't have any particular respect for the law. And then with that coupled with the morale problems y'all had, could that be part of the problem?
Well, it's a little difficult for me to address over the past 15 years. So what I can address is what we saw over the past summer. As many of our other major cities were shut down, the city of Atlanta, for the most part, remained partially open. And so what we were seeing was an influx of people from other major cities coming in and socializing in our city. So much so that when we had conversations with club owners and things of that nature, that they changed their behavior to address outside residents. And it played out in the level of violence that we were seeing in either the arrest or the victims, that they were from outside the city of Atlanta. We had changed our intelligence to begin monitoring who decided that they were going to come to Atlanta to socialize that weekend. So when we received people from Philadelphia having a Philadelphia weekend, or a Detroit weekend, or Washington, D.C. weekend, or New York City weekend in the city of Atlanta, it allows us to know exactly what we were going to be up against for that weekend, but a little difficult for me to acknowledge over the past 15.
Very good. Second question, morale. You know, we've discussed this, and of course, that's only some of our own personal opinions. But, you know, the morale problems that a lot of your senior officers had, or seem to have had last year, especially during the middle of the riots and such like that. We saw on TV a group of officers that had stopped a young college couple and asked them to roll their windows down that were darkened out. And of course, they took the action that they deemed to be necessary. I remember when the General Assembly, at the behest of law enforcement, passed the window tinting law in the state of Georgia, and that was for the benefit of those officers, because when they stop a car, they want to be sure that they can see the people that are in the car, to be sure there's no weapons drawn and such as that. But do you see that morale, is that particular situation being adjudicated now? Is it being improved with the morale of these officers for them to be able to do the job according to protocol?
Morale continued to always be a problem within in my 33 years in law enforcement. Morale has always been an issue. What I can tell you is I do believe from where we were just a year ago to where we are today, our morale is improving. And we monitor this morale by the attrition, what we were seeing last year. The attrition rate has subsided quite substantially. The number of people that we are beginning to onboard in our police department is also improving. And then the conversation that we have day to day with the men and women of our police department also allude to the fact that things are beginning to improve.
I think I understood you to say somewhere in your comments that y'all were creating some special squads. Once upon a time, during the rough and turbulent times of the drug violence, Atlanta had a squad that was noted to be called the Red Dog Squad. And of course, it was disbanded because of certain issues. But have y'all considered specialty squads that could go after the gun violence and or the armed robberies and or the things such as happening up in the Buckhead is creating so much anxiety up there?
So absolutely, that new unit is called the Titan Unit. We believe that the direction that they will have to be more aggressive as it relates to what street violence that we are up against, but it is no way to replace what Red Dog was, but have a different strategy. And being that you brought up Buckhead, one of the things that we thought as we reevaluated it, the resources needed there, we are now in the process of building out a internal mini precinct in the Buckhead space, very similar to what you find in the downtown, our Zone 5 Midtown precinct. We are establishing the very same thing up in Buckhead, being that we recognize that even though they, the crime that they have, many of the officers in that space are stretched to address traffic issues. And so we're giving them the resources to address traffic so our officers can get back to patrolling.
Thanks, Chief. One of the common threads that we've heard from the professional law enforcement officers is more boots on the ground. Whether it be those, excuse me, those officers that would actually be familiar with the neighborhoods within the precincts and such like that. What's your census right now? How many men and women do you have boots on the ground for the Atlanta PD?
So our authorized strength is 2,036. We're probably, and that number change on me almost every single day. We're probably sitting right at 1,700, give or take. But I think it's important. Mr. Skandalakis stated something that I thought was important. He said two things. One, we must all be mindful that we will not be able to police our way out of this. We will not be able to lock up enough folks, regardless of how many number of police officers we have. But the second thing he said was having police presence does have an effect on both the perception of crime as well as the ability for an individual to commit a crime. And so that's why we are working, and it's one of the mayor's initiative. And one of the things that John and I work on aggressively is making sure that we're in a space of background and recruiting new talent to the Atlanta Police Department.
Thank you, Chief, and thank your men and women.
Thank you.
Representative Crowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief, and Mr. King for being here. One of the things, just to follow up with what Chairman Powell was saying, Mr. King, you had mentioned about hiring new officers and meeting targets for that. Can you elaborate a little bit on what those targets are and what kind of numbers you're seeing coming in?
Yes, sir. Happy to do that. So for this year, we set a target to increase our hiring by about 150%. So we were targeting to hire about 5 officers per week. And so we started to track that specifically after we put in place the changes I mentioned starting July 1st, which is the city's fiscal year. And so right now we're exceeding that in terms of hiring 5 officers per week. Last week was the 7th week that we were tracking. We had hired 38 officers. Our target was 35 up to that point. And so we're going to exceed that target as much as we possibly can. And we've obviously, we're going to continue to put in place any and all actions to make sure that we can get as many police officers as we can on the streets.
Okay. Are you seeing experienced officers coming in that have prior law enforcement experience, or a lot of them new? I know, and I've been reading a little bit about the police academy and the training facility and maybe it being relocated somewhere else. Y'all have your own academy, I believe, for new officers. Are you seeing a good mix of experienced officers coming in, or all of these folks having to go through?
No, most of the new candidates are brand new police officers. We're seeing very little in the lateral process, but we're targeting them as well.
Okay. All right. And finally, you talked about Operation Phoenix and taking violent offenders off the street. And this is back to something Mr. Skandalakis said earlier. He was talking about the 3 categories of offenders, and 2 of those being violent offenders and then repeat offenders. Are you finding that a lot of these violent offenders that you're taking off the street with Operation Phoenix, do they have a history of being repeat offenders for lower level crimes? Are we seeing a lot of these repeat offenders that commit lower level crimes eventually become the ones who become the violent offenders that commit these violent acts? So the one we're taking off the street with Operation Phoenix does not necessarily have to be low offenders, but they do almost all have repeat offenders at the violent level. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Chairman Mathis.
Thank you, Chief Bryant, for being here today. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for y'all hard work that you do. You've asked some good questions, all of the folks that asked the questions, but I have one question, and it's you were called, Mr. King was talking about the recruiting, the packages, the incentives and those type things. And I know those things are good, and you law enforcement officers definitely earn every penny that you get. But I'm curious to know, with the rhetoric that went around this state, this city and the cities around the nation, with the elected officials, with the mayor's office, the council members, community leaders, has that gotten any better in Atlanta? That when you recruit these young folks to come in and serve the city of Atlanta, that they know that they are going to be backed up in what they do? I do think that the problem is not the law enforcement. I think it's the criminals. And I just understand that if you don't show them the support that they need, I can understand how morale would be low. So I'm just curious to know if that has changed some, if there was a problem, which it appeared to be. If that's changed, and that you feel, Chief Bryant, that you have the full support of the political spectrum in Atlanta, as far as the mayor, the council, that you can do your job, which I know you know how to do. Do you feel comfortable when we recruit these new folks and the people that you have on staff now, that they are backed 100% by these elected officials? Do you feel comfortable with that when we recruit these folks?
So you asked the two-part question first. I'd like to ask the second part. The people that we encounter when we are recruiting, be honest with you, have no knowledge of what the political scheme of our city or state, maybe it never comes up. We only start to see it once people are within our police department. Secondly, do I feel comfortable that I have the support of this administration? Absolutely. And our council? Absolutely. I don't think that we are ever agree on the same things all the time. But I think when the rubber meets the road, we are in alignment that we can have to continue and support the men and women of the police department.
That's encouraging to hear. I just know we all got to play on the same team, because if we as a state and we as a city, local, rural, and you having all the partners with the state patrol and all the communities and offices that are coming in with you, just being around the situation, knowing how important it is when you have a homicide or where you have an accident or where you have any of the things that go along with an investigation. We definitely have to have the support of the political part. And I think that's why we're having these meetings, is to try to help and secure that. But I just want to commend you for what you're doing in very, very difficult times. But as Director Skandalakis said, people have to be accountable. Criminals have to be accountable. Police officers, folks like me sitting behind this, have to be accountable. And I just want to make sure that everybody is accountable to do the right thing and the moral thing. And it's encouraging to hear that you say that you think that you have the support. And I think that's going to be the answer to fix this crime problem here. If you have the support, I believe you'll get the folks that you need in here to help us get this city back to where this great city can be. And I pray for you. I pray for your whole staff and your force. And I just pray that we'll do the right things. And I hope this committee can help you in any way we can help any of the state patrols, the DAs, all the folks that have come about. I hope we can do that. And I really do appreciate what our law enforcement across the state and all the cities, rural, metropolitan, or whatever it may be. I support you and I pray for you, and I wish you Godspeed on everything that you do.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
We have a few questions online from committee members. Representative Frazier has a question or a comment. We recognize you, Representative Frazier. You there?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Representative Frazier.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. King, for being here today. I would just like to ask, with the crime, 2020 covert, I would just like to just get your opinion on where we are with the domestic violence and child molestation. I've been reading a lot about the increase during COVID, where our children were at home all day long and all year long and being subjected to rape and violence. And I would just like to know where, because of COVID, because the court shut down because of COVID, and even the General Assembly shut down because of COVID. So the country shut down, but these crimes increased, and all crimes are not visible crimes. Where were we and where are we now relating to the cases that you know of that have come, that has surfaced and come up? Because there's many cases that we will never know about, but children were affected. How did that impact the police force in trying to enforce and get information on those type of cases and bring in the criminals, because they are criminals too?
So as it relates to us seeing a significant increase as it relates to child molestation, I'd have to look deeper, do a deep dive into the numbers that we have, because I can't speak openly and directly to it right now. What I can say is, as it relates to domestic violence, we saw 100% increase in domestic violence. We are seeing an increase in sexual assaults as it relates to 2020, but a reduction since 2019, which gives us a more flat line, a more specific baseline to operate from. But we in these incidences where we are able to make arrests, those individuals are held in jail, very much like a violent offender, because it's a violent crime, very much like our homicide perpetrators. They are putting in jail and held in our county facilities.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, but are they kept in jail, or because of the situation with overcrowding, are they being bonded out and let go to go right back into the home?
So that's more of a question for the courts. But what I can tell you from what I know is that the more violent offenders are held, and it's the lower crimes that we seem the lesser crimes that we seem to have more of a revolving door as it relates to property offenders. But the more violent and aggressive offenders are held until their cases are heard. And then if they're not heard in an adequate time, then they may be released.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Evans.
Thank you, Chair. And Chief Bryant, it's a pleasure to meet you over Zoom. And Mr. Keene, thank you so much for your service here today too. Thanks so much to both of you. I wanted to ask a little bit, Mr. Keene, about Operation Shield. And we had some crime in our area, and so I wanted to ask you, are cameras in business parking lots hooked up to the public cameras, or the only cameras you can see on the streets?
Thank you, ma'am, for the question. So we do have a couple things that we do that try to integrate other cameras into our network. So we have what is called a video integration center, and we have, through our Operation Shield network, we have installed cameras Throughout the city, we obviously go through a process with the community to identify areas where we think these cameras should be installed, especially as we go through the process to expand them. All of those cameras are integrated into the Video Integration Center. What we're doing work on now and are making some investments, some of the dollars that were allocated through the American Rescue Plan, we are investing to upgrade our Video Integration Center that will allow us to integrate into that non-City of Atlanta cameras. So for cameras that you might be speaking of that are in a parking lot that may be owned by a business that are not part of that Operation Shield network, if the business owner wants to include those and have them monitored by the Video Integration Center, we are working to make that possible.
Okay, thank you. And Chair, I have, I think, 2 more questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Shepherd came to us with a resolution passed by the Atlanta City Council. I'm on the Atlanta delegation, and she came to us with a resolution asking us to pass a state law regarding ATVs and requiring licenses for ATVs. And Chief Bryan, I wanted to talk to you about what your take was if ATVs on the streets was an issue, and if this idea of asking for licenses would be helpful in addressing this problem.
ATVs are a significant problem in the metropolitan area, especially on the weekends, on a sunny weekend. We see people come from all over and converge on the city as it relates to ATVs. The difficulty in us being able to apprehend them is they are more maneuverable, and our chase policy is very restrictive as it relates to ATVs and motorcycles. And so any effort to readily or better identify to help us minimize what we're seeing would be helpful.
Okay, thank you for that. And then as far as morale and from the community, I would like to talk with you or someone in your department about ways the community can support the different police, different police precincts. I know in DeKalb, I'm in DeKalb, so I have portions of DeKalb in Atlanta, but I know we've done, brought the officers lunch sometimes, things like that. And so I know that there are many in the community that would want to be supportive. So who should I follow up with about that idea?
You could definitely follow up with me.
Yes.
I have no problem working that out. I'll make sure that we get my information or any of the deputy chief's information to you as it relates to that.
Good. Thank you so much, Chief. And thank you again, Mr. King.
Chairman Taylor is, Darlene Taylor has a comment or a question online on Zoom with us. Chair Lady, are you with us?
I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to all of our speakers today. This has been a very informative session, and I'm very grateful that we have it. I'm sorry that I cannot be with you in person today, but I had a conflicting meeting down in Perry. And I am from a rural community, and I have seen a change over the last 10 years in what I would call the security in Atlanta. It has changed tremendously. And I guess one of my concerns is the things that happen in Atlanta filter down to rural communities in South Georgia. I'm seeing things in my community now that we hadn't seen. We have aggressive homelessness. Those folks are being very aggressive to our people on the street. We've had a major crime with someone taking a knife or machete in a big department store. We've seen additional rapes, all kinds of things. We've even had a young person that just stole shoplifting because they've seen it happen in the big stores and they get away with it. So I think part of my concern has been something we've discussed, several people have, is the accountability to those that are committing the crimes. Are they being held accountable? And what can be done? I'm very grateful for the things that you are doing. I just am fearful, are they going to be effective? We are also seeing an increase in those with mental illness committing crimes. and that's overburdening our jails. We're seeing people that have, again, no accountability. Sometimes it's a repeat drug offender, and again, they're committing another crime. And you have a lot more resources than we do in our rural communities, and we look to you for guidance so that we will know how to manage things in our communities. So again, I want to say that I'm grateful for the things you are doing now. I would like to, and I'm sure you do, meet with other law enforcement officials across the state. But I think it's something that is going to need to be done jointly. And again, my community is not the only ones that are seeing these increases. And it's kind of a reflection of what's happened in our city, which to me, Atlanta is the state city. It represents all of us, and we all have great concerns for it. And I guess in closing, I want to ask, is there legislation? Are there things we can do as a committee that will make things better for you and easier for our officers? I know there's been discussion about guns and shootings. Well, in South Georgia, it's a different issue. The knife episode in our store was stopped by someone that had a gun that could stop that person, and they did. They didn't have to fire a shot, but they were able to protect the other store merchants, the merchant in the store, and the other shoppers. So there are different things that apply in different communities, and just like everything else, law enforcement is local too. But as our state flagship city, I'm very concerned, and I want to know that we can do whatever we can to help you. So I'm asking now, is there legislation or things that we can do that will help you?
So as it relates to law enforcement throughout the state, all of us do talk. We operate through GACP, the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police. So we communicate and have different meetings throughout as it relates to issues that we're seeing respective to our regional areas. But being that I am the chief of the city of Atlanta, I do receive calls from chiefs throughout both large and small throughout our state. And we share different ideas and concerns on how we can better combat those. As it relates to legislations that will address us, that's something that I work with through the mayor's office and her with John Keene and the chief of staff, as well as our council, as it relates and it continues to develop. So speaking right now, if there's any legislation, there's none that I could just speak of that we've not put forward already. But surely I know that this isn't a venue and an avenue that we could take if we needed to get something out or bring, elevate to your level. And then I'd be remiss to be here at the state and say that there are not times that I've had conversations with the governor as well and bring those same issues up, and he's been very receptive also.
Thank you.
And Representative Taylor, I'll just add a couple thoughts to Chief Bryant's comments on the ask. I'm not going to speak specific to legislation, and several of these items have already been mentioned. So I'm just going to reinforce a couple of thoughts. One is we have discussed financial support to local governments for initiatives related to addressing violence. On the enforcement side, that obviously includes support for police officers and cameras. On the non-enforcement side, that includes support for these violence prevention programs that have been discussed today. There was a good bit of discussion around financial and operational support for the district attorney's offices and the court systems to resolve the backlogs. That's obviously an important opportunity for investment. On the non-enforcement side of that, and you hinted at this in your comments, Representative Taylor, certainly investments in the mental health services is an important part of what we see here in Atlanta and what you're seeing in your community. I'll also mention the continued support, which we have appreciated and seen for our police departments through existing state public safety resources like the Georgia State Patrol, the GBI. In addition, on the non-enforcement side, continued investment in things like GCAL for mental health crisis response units is an important opportunity that we think continues to need investment. And then I'll just reinforce one other thing, which again, the state is making investments in, and it has been talked about as one of the items that certainly has contributed to the challenges and was significantly exacerbated by the pandemic, which is investing in countering the economic impacts from the pandemic. And that includes the investments that the state is making in rental assistance. That obviously includes the work that's being done to put people back to work. And so all of those things are important investments that should either continue, or we should continue to think about ways to increase our investment.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would like to share that one of the things that we're doing in my community, because it is such a difference for us to deal with, I called together a group. We had about 36 people, everyone from the medical community, the psychiatrics. We had law enforcement, sheriff, and county. I even had public defenders. I had judges there. And I've even gone to tour the jail. We are looking for whatever will help. Every community, I realize, is different. But so much of this we feel like is piggybacking on what they're seeing in other places. And our community, like everyone else, is gearing in specifically for our mental illness problems, because we feel like drug and mental illness is a big part of this problem, and it exacerbates what the law enforcement has to do. So I appreciate your comments and look forward to working additionally with you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions for the chief before we adjourn here today? Any other comments from any of the committee members? Anyone online have anything else they'd like to say?
Chair Collins, this is Rep. Evans.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Chief, one thing, just in thinking about, in listening to everything that you're doing in Atlanta, I do just want to ask about community policing. What kind of community policing are we doing? Because it seems like everything we read about, the best intervention programs are when the community knows the officer.
Absolutely. So the philosophy of community policing is throughout our police department, where all of our officers have to implement some form of community policing throughout their business. But additionally, we have, and I know this goes against many of the criminologists, of having a specific division designed to address community policing. But and here in the city of Atlanta, we think that it's important that we do have one because it gives us the ability to address systematic problems as it relates to community policing in an area. And so we have that level of dedicated resources to do so. And it's done not just through our police department, but again, we rely so heavily on the partnerships that we have to replicate what we're doing here in the city of Atlanta. And it's also done, again, I'd be remiss if I didn't speak about Fulton County Sheriff, who's a strong partner as well, and partner with us and going out and working with the community in many aspects. And again, it goes without saying what Georgia State Patrol does as well. So I think that is important. But additionally, the city of Atlanta is a little bit different in that we make sure without fail that our police representative attend almost every single community meeting, neighborhood planning unit meeting. We have, I stated earlier that I have advisory boards at the chief level that is replicated at the major level as well. Our precinct commanders do the exact same thing. Our police athletic league throughout the pandemic was continuous. It did not shut down at all. Our civilian professionals from the community crime prevention inspectors who really are tied into the community, they too were very consistent. And so that's something that we continue to do, is have conversation and work with the community and building our community policing aspect of what we do every day.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, thank you, Chief, for being here, and all the presenters today, especially to Director Scandalakis for being here with us and kind of setting the tone for us. We really appreciate that. And again, to the Colonel and his staff. If there be no further business before this committee will stand adjourned. Thank you. Okay, well, let me turn it off. Get cut in front of.